us about the Congress itself, the revival that's going on this year, what they got out of it, and hopefully what we get out of it as well. So we're going to start off with Deacon Morkovsky from St. Cyril and Methodius at China. These guys, I know he just got back at 2 o'clock last night, got to bed about 2:30, so someone's got on. So, okay, Michael, come up there.
My pleasure. I was fortunate enough to be able to attend the Congress. It was a little overwhelming, and my brain is a little bit, just jumbled up right now from all the information that was presented. It's going to be hard for me to say this specific person said this specific statement because we heard so many people. As was mentioned, you walk into a stadium of 50 to 60,000 people at the Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. I didn't know what to expect. When I signed up for this, I'm like, okay, sounds like it'd be a good trip. We'll go check it out. And it turns out it was just like all about Jesus. So what do you expect? How can it be bad, right? They handed us this little book as a guide for the Congress. It was in our little bags, and when we registered for the Congress, they had like these morning sessions, and then there's an afternoon sessions, and they're called breakout sessions where you could choose. Like there was just gobs of different breakout sessions to go to. And so I'm looking at all the breakout sessions, the titles of them and everything, and I'm sitting there going, I don't have a clue as to. Everything looked interesting, everything looked good. And so I just did my selection. I ran with the biblical theology of the Eucharist track, all 3 days in a row with different presenters. But there was women's support things. There was things for the family. I mean, people had their families there, their wives. We're just flooded with bishops and seminarians and religious sisters. And so it started on a Wednesday evening. And so we all make our way over to the Lucas Oil Stadium for the first, the kickoff of this. And we walk in and we got there. I guess they had kind of maybe started a little bit early, or there was a video being played. I mean, you got to imagine. We're talking this huge stadium, these big screens. I'm not talking about the jumbotrons, but on either side of the stage, the whole, it turned into these different projectors, and there was this video going on about basically the creation of God, all of creation. It's going through nature and different things. And again, my mind is a little foggy because I was just overwhelmed by the amount of people there. And the sound system was unreal, okay? And it overwhelmed me. I mean, the bass that was hitting with the music playing, and it just kept crescendoing up to this just louder and louder and louder, and you just feel it in your chest. And I'm sitting there, and the first thing that came to mind was, look how big this is. Being in this room, in this stadium, with 50 to 60, it grew to 60,000 as the week went on. But you're sitting there with 50,000 people, all of the same faith. Maybe there were non-Catholics there as well. And what just dwelled in my heart was, as big as this is, as much as I can feel it resonating in my body, it's just a grain of sand to the size of God. And I started crying. I was just sitting there, tears welling in my eyes. I was just like, this is so grand, but yet there's more than this. And that is what this conference was about, was the Eucharist, and who the Eucharist is, and the importance of, and how we have grown slack as a church in our adoration of the Eucharist. And so this revival they're calling on this, it's all about this revival, so I'm a dummy, so I had to go and look up a few words just so I could figure out, okay, what exactly is this all about? So, first off, this is called the Eucharistic Congress. So, I go look up, what's the definition of a Congress? It's a formal meeting for discussion and usually action on that discussion. Okay, that's the definition of a Congress. Is a coming together of like minds to come up and discuss an aspect and then to plan action with that aspect. Okay, Congress. I said, all right. Well, what's a revival? I mean, you hear CPR, you revive somebody, and I'm like, okay, yeah, but I've seen these revival tents, with people, different religions, having these revivals, and it's a renewed attention or interest in something, this revival. And so I'm like, okay, so here we are, we're answering that question of where they did that question, that survey of how many Catholics believe in the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And I don't think the numbers could ever come in high enough. So the whole point of this is to reinvigorate the faithful as to how important the Eucharist is and how we cease to exist, basically, without the substance of the Eucharist. So, the way the days went, we started out with a rosary, and then we had a Mass, and there were several different Masses that were available in the mornings. There was English, Spanish, youth. There was even we had one Mass that was the Eastern Rite, the Cyril Malabar Corbana, an Indian Mass, okay, that we participated in. Then we had this morning, they called them impact sessions. And with the impact sessions, there were, about six different impact sessions that you could choose which one you wanted to go to. Well, we picked the same one every time. It was always in the stadium. And the one we picked was called Encounter. And so each day, like here's the book. So each day there were different presenters that would dwell on a particular aspect of the day. And the way the days went, everything was centered around the Eucharist. So this first morning, we had, I don't know if y'all heard of Monsignor James Shea. Okay, I didn't know who he was from Adam. And turns out he's the president of do you remember the name of the college, Deacon Mike?
No. It was Mary something.
St. Mary's, Mary or something.
It was up kind of North Dakota or somewhere up in there. Montana.
Right, there you go. And he came out there, the most calm individual, and he started talking, and he basically went through the story of creation all the way up. And I took a few notes, and he talked about on the story in creation that he talked about the dependency on God. And he started with the inanimate objects like rocks and rocks, dirt, water, things like that, right? Your basic elements. And how their dependency on God is different than the dependency of the next step of biological creatures. Okay, your biological creatures are a little bit more dependent on God as they have a beating heart and they require sustenance. And then he ended with, the most dependent creature on God is man, who is the pinnacle of his creation. And how when we dismiss that, when we dismiss the importance of God for our sustenance, You know, that it's a very sad thing. And how in that need, in that sustenance, being that we are body and soul, he offered his body for us to feed on. Okay? To feed our soul. And how we can never be truly human without our soul being fed. And he was so calm about it. I mean, the man's obviously the president of a college, so he's very intellectual. But when he was talking about how here you have the greatest thing in the universe, God, comes to us and give us his body, blood, soul, and divinity to feed our soul, to energize those sacramental graces that we receive through baptism and confirmation, through the Eucharist, that how we've replaced the need for that with so many other things in this busy world. Through different addictions, drugs, alcohol, things. Things were a big deal. We replace it with trying to fill these voids in our life, these holes in our life with different things. But why do we not look to those things through God's eyes? And he really lets you know that the greatest thing in the world is right in front of you, and it's offered to you freely, and it's offered to you daily, why do we not participate in that more often? Why do we not participate in that more often? Yet we seem to think that other things are more important, Maybe our jobs get in the way, even though Mass is available daily. And how if 70 million Catholics in the United States would start to reach for Christ more, how much would that change our country? Okay? So that was just one of this guy just blows you away. All right? And you walk out of there and you're like, okay, the next session is in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or what would seem like just an instant. And then you're in the sea of people leaving this place, and you're like all smashed together, and then you're going over to the convention center to another class, another session of whatever it is that you picked. But you're walking along, and you're going through this sea of people, and everyone's saying hi and how are you doing, and there wasn't commotion. It was just not busy people, just people eager to get to the next thing. I've never been in a place with 60,000 people. Maybe I don't even know about a football game or something like a big football game or anything like that, but I've never been in a place to where you weren't scared to leave, like my wife, you're not scared to leave her bag on the chair, and we both get up and leave everything sitting there and go get up and go use the restroom. And not worry about it being gone when you get back. It was just the most awesome feeling. Some of these other tracks, so I'm just going to go through some of the stuff that I attended because I can attest to it. I went to the biblical theology. So session 1, we had, I don't know if y'all know Dr. Ben Akers. He's a professor. Dr. Tim Gray with the Augustine Institute. And then there's this lady, her name was Elizabeth Lev. And she was a doctor of art history and everything. And so she starts talking about religious art. I'm like, okay, what does this have to do with the Eucharist? This whole thing is centered around the Eucharist. And so she goes, we're going to talk about Michelangelo's Pietà, if I'm saying it right. That marble statue of Mary holding our crucified Lord, or what appears to be on her lap. Okay? And then she talked about this painting by Caravaggio, and it was basically It was a painting, but it's where they're putting Jesus into the tomb. He's kind of falling out of their hands going into the tomb. And so we were in Rome a year and a half ago, and we got to see all these in person, but I didn't know any of the history behind it. They're beautiful painting, beautiful sculptures, right? I mean, I don't know many people that haven't at least seen that, but maybe they didn't know what it was, but they probably saw what it was. I didn't know that these things were altar pieces. I didn't know that the Pietà was an altar piece. So what an altar piece is, used to be where the altar was connected to the high altar and where the priest had his back to you. This would have been set right above the tabernacle. This picture, okay? Or the Pietà. And so what she was doing, she was telling us the religious significance behind obviously it's Jesus, right? So it's going to be a religious article. But what they meant by it and the things that gathered from it. And if you look at those, just a couple of things from those two, was on the Pietà, the Blessed Mother is not touching Jesus with her hands. Her left hand is in the air. Her right hand is under Jesus, holding him here, but there is part of her veil in between. So her hand is not touching any of his flesh. She is not touching any of his flesh, and he is not sitting on her lap or laying across her lap. If you look at it from the side, he is falling off of her lap. And the whole point of this, as for a Eucharistic aspect, is he's above the altar. She's letting him down on the altar as the bread of life. I never knew that. Okay? And also the fact that her hand wasn't touching him here is why we put on the humeral veil when we're holding the monstrance. That is why you don't see the hands touching the monstrance during the benediction. Hands can touch it other times, but during benediction, when we're being blessed, as he was put on the altar. In the other painting by Caravaggio, it's similar, but it's a man letting him down, and there's someone standing behind with their hands in the air, and several people, and they're all like falling forward. And the whole point that Caravaggio was trying to impress was most paintings draw your eyes from the bottom up. This one draws your eyes from the top down. And Jesus' hand is falling to the side. And so underneath it, on the bottom of the painting, it's just a black section of no picture, no artwork. And in those days, they would call Caravaggio crazy. Like, why did you not just paint something pretty there? Well, the whole point of that, where it was placed on the altar, above the altar, it was precisely in that black space where the priest would elevate the host. He would not block Jesus. And it's a picture of Jesus being let down on the altar. Okay, so these are the kind of things, these Eucharistic images is what they brought out. And so I was like all into that. And that was the first session I went to. I'm like, okay, if they're all going to be like this is going to be good. Let me get back to that schedule. So then we had afternoon breakouts, and then there was afternoon liturgies. If you didn't go to Mass earlier in the day, they had some in the afternoon. And then from 7 to 9:30 or from 7 to 10 in the evening, they had the revival session, where basically they had speakers would come out. They had that praise and worship music as loud as you can imagine, but not ear-piercing, but just so much. I mean, it just shook your body. I don't know how many times I had my phone in my pocket and I thought it was ringing, and it wasn't. It was the music was so thunderous that it vibrated everything in your pockets, and it was crazy. It was good. It was good. I mean, I'm sure some people didn't get into that part of it. I mean, I wasn't one of the ones that was dancing around with their hands in the air and all that either. It's okay. The second day, you know, the format kind of went the same. You know, you had Mass and the Rosary, Mass, the morning session, of, you know, one of which he chose out of 6, and then the breakout sessions in the afternoon, which there was I don't know, 20, maybe 20, 25 of them to choose from. That second day, I got to see Dr. Scott Hahn. I don't know if y'all heard of Dr. Scott Hahn. So he gave a talk. And he talks fast. Not as fast as Father Mike Schmitz, though. He rattles. I mean, And then after Scott Hahn, who, I mean, I'm not dismissing him by any means. The man is a genius when it comes to biblical theology. And he put his, let me see if I probably have some notes from him too. He put in, let's see. If I wrote these things, I probably don't even know what they mean now. We take the words for granted as Catholics. So he was more into the words and what they mean when we're in Mass and during the Eucharistic prayers, how our ears can just become kind of tone deaf, right? And if you just, who was that I was saying, if you pick out a particular piece of the Mass and listen to it, how that was Bruce, how, and you hear something different, right? You hear it. And you dwell on it, and that's how the Word of God works in our lives. You know, just like reading the Bible, you read a story one time, and then read it 3 months later, and it's a completely different meaning on, you know, based upon where you are in your life. And so he was talking greatly about that. And then this priest came on, Father Robert Spitzer. So I didn't know him. He's blind. But he's a science. He likes to talk about science and God, and so he got into his talk, and he was talking about the compression of time and the 2 compressions of time during the Last Supper and all these different things. And let me find this note here. He goes into a little bit of the definitions of. This is my body given up for you. This is my blood, right? At the elevations, do this in memory of me. And he pulled the word body out, and he hit it with the Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew. And he said this body is not necessarily a good translation of that. He goes, what it means, and this it floored me. He goes, what the word means is everything. I give you everything. I don't just give you my body. I'm giving you my soul, my flesh, my blood. I'm giving you my entire self. And so when you listen to the words then, it's not like, okay, he gave us his body, you know, the body hanging on the cross, right? And he's buried, and 3 days later, and we partake of his resurrected body. We don't just partake of his resurrected body. And that's what he was driving home, is we take part in his everything. His everything. And that the smallest piece is his everything. A large host, still the same everything. A drop of wine, a drop of the precious blood is still his everything. And he hearkened that back to the manna in the desert. Okay? So y'all know the story of Exodus when they're all grumbling because they're hungry, and so manna came down from heaven like hoarfrost on the ground, and during the day they could collect it, but they couldn't keep it overnight or it would spoil. And those that collected a small amount, it was enough. And those that went out there and collected huge amounts, it was still the same amount as what everyone else had. Because even the smallest piece, those that couldn't collect much, still had enough. And he just dwelled on how the smallest fragment is still everything. Blew me away. I mean, we hear that, we know that. That's why we're so reverent with the way we purify, and if something, if the precious blood is spilled, why we take such great care of. But when you hear that definition of, I give you, this is my body, this is my everything, this is my whole essence. Maybe that's not the correct word, but it sounds good right now. So that was Dr. Robert Spitzer. And he went into, I could talk about the compression of time and how at the Last Supper, the Eucharistic side of the Last Supper, we all know that, right? He gives them, this is my, he hands them the bread, this is my body, right? Well, what he was handing them was his crucified body. So he talks about the compression of time, how God exists outside of time. He can see the past, the present, and the future. Everything exists at the same time. So here we have Jesus giving his resurrected body, even though he's not on the cross yet. That's the sacrifice. The sacrifice starts at the Last Supper, not just on the cross. Another aspect of that is, in Hebrew culture, the sacrifice had to take place within Jerusalem. Well, the cross was outside the walls. So they couldn't have satisfied the sacrifice. Right? So talk about this compression of time. Okay. The next day, Jeff Cavins. Next day I got to hear Jeff Cavins. And I have in my heart something for Jeff Cavins because he had a lot to do with me kind of like coming back to the church. So his Bible Timeline series and all this. And so he's talking about the Eucharist, and he's talking about the bread, and he goes into the teaching of the unleavened bread. Why did God demand unleavened bread during the Passover? I'm like, I never thought of that. Why did he specifically say unleavened bread? And so he gives the history of the Egyptians. Now, I'm probably just steering all over the place, but I'm just trying to let you know what some of these talks were about. Long story short, with the bread, so the Egyptians believed in all these gods, and we know that through the plagues, right? Each plague was to contradict, was to show that the one true God was greater than any of the gods that they believed in. Well, the Egyptians believed that when you put yeast in dough, in bread, and it rises, at the moment that it rises, it takes on magical powers. And if you eat it after it's risen, you take on the power of the gods that made that rise. Okay? And you received magical powers. Right? And so he demanded in his prescription unleavened bread for them to eat. So that through the miracle of the Passover, the angel of death passing over could not be attributed to any kind of Egyptian god. He was trying to get Egypt out of the people and prove that Egypt isn't doing this for you. I am doing this for you. So all these little aspects, okay? Each evening we had adoration, Eucharistic adoration. And to be in a room of 60,000 people, to be this quiet in that auditorium was amazing. And you hear a baby crying way away, or very small things. The last evening that we had adoration, we had long periods of silence. The other evenings we had adoration, it would be a short period of silence, and then praise and worship music, and then a short period of silence, and then maybe a reflection. And it was that last evening of adoration, which took place after the big Eucharistic procession, that it was so holy. I mean, it was really, if I just stop talking right now and as quiet as you all are, That's what it sounded like. With 60,000 hearts beating. So we went from one end of the spectrum to the other. From thunderous, feel it vibrating your bones, to just hearing air. It was just a beautiful experience. There's a few phrases that I wrote down as from the speakers. Adoration builds relationship, but that relationship goes two ways. We don't just go to adoration to bring all our prayers and our needs. Not that we can't do that, but He is also calling us to go out. He's empowering us to go out and take His, just like the mission statement says, to go out. One that I heard was, we should not think of ourselves as living for God. And the person said that, and I was like, we're not living for God. We need to take on the attitude that we're living from God. I was like, I really like that. I really like that. I'm going to do this for God. No. I'm going to use what I have from God to do this. And share it with others. They talked about cultural Catholics. How we, over the years, over the, centuries, hundreds of years, it's a cycle. Our humanity is a cycle on getting close to God and falling away from God, and how we squander, as Catholics, we squander our inheritance by not taking advantage of the sacraments as often as we can. These freely given gifts. Don't let your faults surprise you. That was interesting. They were talking about faults and how the greatest of saints had faults. And to be a saint is to embrace those faults and invite God in to help you get through these faults. Instead of taking on the perception that I can do everything on my own. Don't let your faults surprise you. When you get hit with a fault, know that we're imperfect, living in an imperfect world, and that sometimes these faults and these, just like bad things happen, is to remind us that there's something greater than this that we're working towards. And then Chris Stefanik, he gave one of the last talks. He actually spoke at our church a few years back. He does a lot of the theology of the body for teens, and talks about breaking the habit of pornography and living chastely. He said, as disciples, as we were called to be disciples, he goes, you got to remember that go is 2/3 of God's name. To go out. You're not called to come receive the Eucharist just for yourself. You go to receive the Eucharist to give you the strength to go out and be the disciples that we're called to be. And I really clicked on that when he said that 2/3 of God's name is go. And then I was Bishop. I don't know why I put these tabs in here because I still can't find anything. Bishop, not Cardinal Golden. Who was it? I have to look through here. Anyway, he was talking about how we look at our religious, we look at our priests and our bishops, and we see them as being called to poverty, to obedience and chastity, and how we are also called to the same thing as the laity.
It was Robert Barron.
Robert Barron, Mr. Robert Barron. Okay, thank you, Bruce. You saw that talk? Yeah, yeah. And how that's not just something for the ordained, you know. Poverty, not necessarily meaning poverty as in monies, but it's as in, you know, not meaning you have to live, you know, in a cardboard box or something, but how you use your resources, and how much do you hog for yourself, and how much do you use to help out, give alms to others. Obedience, you know, obedience to the church. We had one speaker that she just put it flat out: if you have something against Pope Francis, if you think he's like completely off the mark, you are not Catholic, because he is our Pope. Okay, you're allowed to, you know. How about this? You might think that, but to spread that is another thing. Okay? And then the best one was the call to chastity. That, you know, chastity isn't necessarily now they're called to a chastity of no sexual relations, but chastity also exists within marital sexual relations, and how we're called to live chastely in our thoughts, in our hearts, in our minds. And so when we look at those vows that ordained ministers take, you know, we also should be following those same vows as laity. All right, my head is a jumbled mess. Anybody have any questions? I'm sure I thought of a million things before I got here. If I start talking and it all goes away. So I just pray to the Holy Spirit to guide me, and hopefully something that I said sparks your interest into, you know, every time I receive the Eucharist, every time I receive His body, blood, soul, and divinity, that you should not walk out of that church the same as you were when you walked in. You know, we're called to a constant changing, a constant conversion. You know, we take conversion as being some kind of drastic, oh, look, you know, one day you were this and now you're this. No, conversion needs to take place throughout your whole life. And through the reception of His body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist, His whole being that He poured out for us, that He offered for us. You know, what we don't want to be, we're fixing to get in our Sunday reading, we're fixing to jump into John 6, you know, the Bread of Life Discourse. And what we don't want to find ourselves as, and you can look it up, is John 6, verse 66. And those that could not handle this walked away and returned to their normal way, to their old way of life. Right? We're not. So if we're going to Mass and we're receiving as a cultural Catholic because, oh, well, that's what I'm supposed to do, we need to kind of look at that a little bit differently and look at the reason of why are we actually here? What are we actually here for? You know, we're here to fight concupiscence. That's what that Eucharist does. That's what He does for us. We're called to that. We're called to that change. We're called to that, and it can be slow. Some people it's like a baseball bat. Some people it's just a inching forward. You know, you look at that clock back there, and I think it's going slow as dirt, but it's actually moving. You know, and every time you receive that Eucharist, you should be progressing and not staying in the same place.
You know, that saying, I've heard this over and over. When people say, well, I'm only human. That's exactly where it's supposed to be. Human, like Jesus Christ. perfect human.
Perfect human, yeah.
It's a sinfulness in our humanity that causes that, but we're supposed to be a perfect human like Jesus.
So you compared us to, it's good, you're helping my memory. The one they compared us to a bucket of coal, right? You know, you put charcoal briquettes in a bucket, light them on fire, and they sit there and they'll burn and they light each other off, and you know, you get this nice glow. You take one out and set it to the side, it goes out. Doesn't have enough surrounding it to help it, you know. And we don't want to be that charcoal briquette by going to Mass and receiving this blessed sacrament and then keeping it to ourselves. You know, it won't. You're not stoking it. Here the last cardinal. Sorry, he was the papal delegate. Louis Cardinal Tagle. I looked him up. He's Philippine. He was the presider at the closing Mass, and he talked about gift, on how everything we have is a gift. You know, you think of that, everything you have in the world is a gift. Even though you might have worked for it, still, you know, it's still everything we have is a gift. And he goes, gifts are made to be given away. And I turned to Lindsay and I go, see, I told you it wasn't wrong to re-gift. I said, he just made it. He just told us we're allowed to re-gift. You know, and which brings me to that Eucharistic prayer. In the Eucharistic prayer, there's one statement, and Bruce, you caught it when you said listening to those words. There's one that's just been sticking out, and then he says it, this papal delegate, this ambassador from the Pope, right? About giving the gift. And in that Eucharistic prayer, it says, from the gifts you have given us, may we be made worthy to be the sacrifice. Right? As Jesus is the sacrifice. Right? Think about that. You know, we look at the sacrifice that we offer at the Mass. Why do we offer the body, blood, soul, and divinity back to God? Because it's the greatest gift He's ever given us. We can't give God back anything greater than His Son. Okay? And so in that Eucharistic prayer is saying basically, may we be made worthy to be an offering back. May we be made that pure through the gift of your Son, through the strength of the sacraments, to be made that pure, to be offered back to the Father. Yeah, those things stick out, and then bam, I hear it, and there's a homily about it, and so. Okay, that's about as much as my adrenaline is going to go. So, is there any other questions? Because it might spark something else up. Yeah. Deacon Tanksley, are you going to have any words?
No, not that could fit in with the goal.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Sure.
Right. What I'm saying is that there's so much, as you know, that went on that it's like eating a peanut. I'm not going to give you a half a peanut. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, all I can tell you is, going there, I knew it was going to be a beautiful thing. I didn't know how beautiful. I was glad I had the opportunity to go. When you're there, you're wishing like, man, everyone should be here. 70 million Catholics in the world, and there were 60,000 there. You think of that, right? So
Yeah, if you get a chance, just go on YouTube and watch the Mass on the last Mass Saturday morning, and just look at the procession. It takes 26 minutes.
Yeah.
For these thousands, there's over 1,000 seminarians, another 1,000 plus priests, 150 something bishops that are all just going to the altar.
Yeah.
Amazing.
30, yeah, it was right at 30 minutes, that entrance procession. And I counted 158 bishops, and I know I didn't get them all.
Yeah.
And the cardinals, and I was like, golly. And our Pope was behind this as well. He had our backs. we had his blessing, you know? So it was something to see. And as my wife said, she goes, this is so awesome to be around this many people with the same faith. But then it's going to be awesome to not be around this many people after trying to navigate through. So